Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Cammy is off tonight. A Lawrence man accused of using hidden cameras to capture nude photos of a minor in 2021 has been sentenced in federal court. With a plea deal, Richard Cannell is ordered to serve 5 years in prison and 5 years of supervised release. He also has to register as a sex offender. Cameras are not allowed in federal court, but Brittany Schmidt listened to the details of Cannell's sentence in a First Alert exclusive.
Our cameras exclusively captured Richard Cannell being escorted into the federal courtroom for sentencing. He's been in custody since the fall of 2021 when Brown County investigators arrested him. According to federal court documents, in August of 2021, Cannell produced multiple recordings of a minor female. While naked in the bathroom of his Lawrence home, she unknowingly exposed her private areas to a recording device that Cannell placed in the bathroom. The documents include photos of Cannell setting up the recording devices controlled through a phone. Additional search warrants of Cannell's Lawrence home found recording devices in picture frames, smoke detectors, and digital clocks. A federal grand jury originally indicted Cannell on 4 counts of production of child pornography. If convicted, each charge carries a max of 15 years in prison. But in July of this year, Cannell pled guilty to the amended charge of possession of child pornography, an offense that has a maximum of 10 years in prison. That changed too when the parties reached a plea deal. Federal documents reveal concern among recent appellate court decisions regarding photos of this nature and whether the recordings of the victim in this case constituted sexually explicit conduct. The government asked for 8 years in prison. The defense argued for 5. The federal judge says he reviewed several documents in this case, including victim statements. He called Cannell's actions, quote, disgusting, outrageous, and deserving of punishment. Cannell addressed the court, taking full responsibility for his actions and apologizing to the victim. Ultimately, the judge sentenced Cannell to 5 years in prison and 5 years of supervised release. While Cannell's case was here at the federal courthouse, just across the street at the Brown County Courthouse, Cannell's girlfriend at the time of the crime, Samantha Trebilcock, is preparing for a jury trial at the end of November. As of Friday, Trebilcock faces 4 felonies, including child enticement, sexual exploitation of a child, and capturing images without consent. Brown County prosecutors allege she helped entice a teenage victim to Cannell's home, where she was secretly recorded while undressed. In Brown County, Brittany Schmidt, Action 2 News.